cloud. Okay, we're recording to the cloud. Week 12B before week 12A. We have Amy Bradshaw from University of Oklahoma later in the week for week 12A. Jim Klein, or James Klein, Dr. Klein, is joining us from Florida State, where days like today in Bloomington, we're not too jealous, but probably 2 weeks from now, we'll be really jealous. We're in the 60s this week, so it's very pleasant outside here in Bloomington. Lovely trees still turning and whatnot. So this is probably one of the better times to hang out in Bloomington. Probably one of the better times to hang out in Tallahassee too. And so we're going to talk to James a bit about jobs in the field, because we're reading an article of his that he wrote with Nicholas Rushby, getting involved in instructional design and technology recommendations for professional development, which is in the Reeser and Dempsey book that we're reading many chapters or many pieces, however you want to call it, this semester. And I've known James on and off since probably 1998 or 97 when I interviewed at Arizona State. And I actually was offered the job. And I think James told me, we might not fund that building that you're supposed to be in charge of here. So you might think carefully about whether to accept the job or not, because it was running the Teaching and Learning Center at Arizona State, like a $30 million futuristic building. And lo and behold, the government didn't pass the final funds, and that place was never built. But I did love the campus and Tempe, Arizona, and the people and all that. And I was really close. My daughter wanted me to take it so she could have a swimming pool, So do you remember that, Jim?
Vaguely, Curt. There were so many things that they didn't fund. That's why I got out of there.
Including faculty salaries. How long were you at Arizona State?
23 years. I grew up there. You start as an assistant professor, become an associate professor, become a full professor, become a department chair, and then everything fell apart. And they closed the graduate school of ed, moved this in with the teacher college, closed my department. And so it was time to find another. In fact, as you know, Curt, I was offered a job at Indiana right before I took the Florida State job. So it was like
I was going to mention that, but I thought I shouldn't. But since you mentioned it, go ahead.
Yeah. So I had interviewed at Florida State, and it's my alma mater. And Marcy Driscoll, who's dean at the time, said, "You'll get tenure. Don't worry about it." And they used to not give tenure upon, coming. It's like, I'm not coming. After 23 years, I deserve tenure, right? So she says, it'll take some time. So in the meantime, Brush writes and says, "Hey, we got this position. Why don't you come interview with us?" So I got a hold of Marcy and I said, "Look, I've got this opportunity. Even though, you told me I'm going to get it." She says, "Look, you ought to go to Indiana and you ought to see what it's all about, because you don't want to have regrets later." It was 9 degrees. The snow was up to my knees. And Brush says, "Well, we'll give you more money than Florida State." And I said, "Yeah, but, I don't know if I want to deal with the winters, Tom." And wasn't just the winters. I felt like as a graduate of Florida State, I had that, I don't know, you got that emotion. You want to go back to your alma mater and you want to make it a better place. And so that's really why I chose Florida State over Indiana. But I could be sitting in Bloomington right now, Curt.
We could have these what ifs. What if about Arizona State for me? What if about for you? But I do remember it. I think Ted Frick too was maybe interim department chair. Maybe it was Tom Brush, but
it was Frick. Yep, it was Frick. Tom was in the dean's office, I think, at the time.
That's what it was. Okay, so they're both after you, because I think they both had administrative positions. They said, "Here's the guy we want," and I think they gave it the best shot that we had, and we were sad you went to Florida State, but it's it's a great place to be too. Both institutions have been leaders within this field for a long time, and maybe we should ask the question. And same with Arizona State. I deal with Florence Martin all the time. In fact, I had dinner with Florence and Vanessa. We just did a special issue VTR&D together, and Florence wants to do another. She's got to be one of the most fabulous people in this entire field. I've met hundreds of people in this field over the past 3 decades. And there's something about Florence Martin that makes her stick out very impressively above others. And it's not just productivity, but that's a key part of it. But it's just her personality. So kind and receptive and unassuming. She was your student, or maybe a student of someone's at Arizona
No,
State.
she was my student. I was her dissertation advisor, and very proud of Florence. One of the great successes that I've worked with. She, just great individual.
Yeah, she's very talented. I think she's tired of me saying this. I keep saying she'll be a president of AECT someday, or she should be anyhow. And just how she can accomplish so many things all at once with raising kids, and not being at a tier 1 university, having to be heavier teaching load that we do at Florida State in Indiana. And she still accomplishes twice as much as anybody else. So my hat's off to you, to the mentoring you've done with Florence and many others. In fact, I circled your CV and a couple of points. You've done lots of things, and one of the things you've done lots of is mentoring of students. And I'm going to ask you to pick out 1 or 2 stories along the way of different areas in which you've been prominent. And one of the things that you've done is you've chaired many dissertations. Can you pull out 1 or 2 dissertations and people that you've worked with and say, this is a dissertation I'm extremely proud of, and everyone in the audience here should read it, or everyone's going to, most people watch the archive later. Which of the dissertations that you've chaired would you say that the majority of people should be reading it, and why, and whose was it?
Sure. Well, first of all, I also chaired Krista Glazewski's dissertation with Tom. And so some of you know Krista's work as well. And so it kind of, it depends on what it is you're looking for. And, this is somewhat my progression as a researcher, and something I was going to talk with you all about today. I was trained as a logical positivist. I mean, the people who were at Florida State at the time when I was a student, Bob Gagne and Roger Kaufman and Walter Dick and all of those people, Bob Morgan, the people that sort of the founding fathers of our field, were all trained as experimental psychologists. And this is where they came from. And so here at Florida State, I was trained in the quantitative tradition. And so you'll see early in my career a number of studies in which we did experimental and quasi-experimental designs, and we examined issues related to what I consider as active learning strategies. So we looked at things like collaboration. We looked at things like learner control. And so we examined those, again, from a quantitative quasi-experimental position. Now, we still use, and I remember when Steve Ross, who was the editor of ETR&D at the time, said, we really as a field should be using more mixed methods. So we always use some open-ended questions. Especially with collaborative learning, it was like, Ross was like, well, if you're going to do collaborative learning, Jim, you need to observe them collaborate. Like, okay. So we then started out doing observations, but it was still very much quantitative with qualitative tools. As the field progressed, and as I matured as a researcher, you begin to see me doing much more qualitative research, or at least, and it's not just the maturity of the field, but I got involved with Rita Ritchie, and we were doing, how do you do research on the models and the tools and the interventions in the instructional design world? Well, yeah, you could do an experiment, but primarily the work in examining instructional design models and tools are very qualitative in nature. So because I got interested, I was very interested in active learning strategies. I became very interested in sort of like instructional design practices. And again, so moving from a quantitative to a more qualitative focus was something that I did. So to answer your question, I mean, one of the very early dissertations that were done in collaborative learning, it was very well done, was by a guy by the name of Greg Sherman. And Greg's work was very quantitative in nature, and he examined collaboration and he manipulated variables within collaboration in a science classroom. So I think that was a good example. Again, if you want to look at an early example of more mixed method qualitative work, I think Krista's is a good one, Krista Glazewski, where they did, problem-based learning. They developed this. The problem was you had to fly a balloon around the world, and in order to do that, you had, you couldn't fly over Iraq, for an example, because there were real world problems. And so, from sort of like like the old Jasper Woodbury,
yeah, we've talked about that in here.
Yeah. So I think she had a good example of that. Now, if you look more recently, and again, that being qualitative research, I've had, because of our EDD program, and students are trying to answer practical problems in the real world, right? And so I've had some recent dissertations that are still, being done right now. I got a woman that's looking at like, what are the human performance improvements? So she's taking Gilbert's behavioral engineering model, and she's saying, okay, what are the supports that an organization must provide people who are going to be remote workers? And so she looks at things like, rewards and information and feedback and management and leadership and all those external factors that the BEM says should be done to support performance. And she's looking at this for remote technology workers. And this is a good, good example of an interview study. Jeff Phillips, who just graduated and has just completed his dissertation looking at change managers. And so what do change managers do what strategies are they using, and why are they using those strategies, and what impact do those strategies have on the management of change in organizations? So Grant, a great dissertation where he did 21-hour interviews with practitioners. And so I think, once again, you sort of look at my progression, moving from quantitative experimental intervention studies to more qualitative studies focused on human performance improvement, focused on change management. And so those studies. And one other area I mentioned, I had a dissertation a few years ago that Allison Moore, Moore, wrote, and it was a survey study where she did questionnaires and interviews of instructional designers, and how do instructional designers facilitate informal learning in the workplace. And so, once again, my progression. So I've always kind of let the students help me evolve, right? It's like, Curt, people say, no, you're going to do a dissertation on this because that's my area and that's it. Well, I let my students kind of lead me in these directions as well.
So I want to clarify
there.
Yeah. So he did, or she did, 21 hours. You said 21. I was thinking at first, 21 hours in an interview? Oh, 20 interviews that were 1 hour apiece.
Right. 20 interviews that were, and some of them went for 90 minutes. Yeah. And then as he used the in vivo software to figure it out, he really got into inductive and deductive coding, and he looked at parent and grandchild themes, and very fascinating study. If you would have said to me, 35 years ago that I'd be chairing dissertations like that, I would have told you you're crazy, because I learned from, it's like, okay, so you got analysis of variance, you got multiple regression, right? And that's the tradition that we learn, Curt, right?
We heard that story from Timothy Newby at Purdue, and his training in Utah was all quantitative, all psychologists. They pulled him aside and they were doing pretty much behavioral psychology research over there. And we've heard the story from Scott Grebinger and Brent Wilson. All these people have been telling us some similar stories of evolution within the field. I had that too. I was very quantitative. In fact, the paper we won last week, best paper, was a structural equation modeling paper, looking at, well, anyways, it was a scaffolded, that one was a meta-analysis paper on scaffolded learning in online environments. But the one we just submitted was a structural equation model to get depressed and non-depressed students during this online pandemic, and looking at their lower self-efficacy impacting effort among the depressed students. Is very quantitative. We still have quantitative studies, and you still can publish them often faster and quicker than the qualitative, but the qualitative have emerged on the scene across all journals. And people move to mixed methods. Most of mine are mixed methods where you do focus group surveys, other kind of content analysis things, in addition to, the survey research, in addition to the interviews, in addition to, so you're combining surveys and some heavy data analysis, and the focus groups and interviews all get mixed together. And it depends on the questions. It depends on, what you're looking at, and access. Often that's a big impact too. But you mentioned an informal learning study, you mentioned change management study, and you mentioned a remote worker study. Right today, this is where it's at. It's remote workers, all coming in through Zoom. So those three individuals who are situating themselves really good for getting jobs in this field, because informal learning is 90% of what we do, and remote learning is almost 100% of what we do. So it's interesting to be on different dissertations and watch people's questions change over time. From, when I first started in '89, I think the first one I was on was a nursing study looking at critical thinking in a hospital bed area, which is probably still pretty relevant and important today, and so forth. So I can't even think of my most recent study that I've been on, but some are looking at instructional designers like you, instructional design practices, and interviewing folks in the field. So you've seen a heavy a change. So the normal question I would ask is at the end, what do you see in the future? But let's ask it right now. Where do you see the field given all this and your evolution in this field? And we'll go back in time later, but let's move ahead. What do you see? What should these people think about exploring for their dissertations and for their next inquiry papers and the classes they're going to take in the spring semester?
So, again, before I answer that question, let me tell you all a little bit about what I believe education or instructional technology is. That's a really important issue for me, right? And so I really do believe in the notion that our field's about learning and performance. And our field looks at issues such as how do we improve motivation, learning, and performance in a variety of settings. Okay, so I'm very much in that systems tradition. Okay. So when we begin to sort of think about the future, I just gave this keynote presentation at a virtual conference in Turkey, and somebody asked the question, so do you think these things you're talking about are still relevant today? And I'm like, absolutely, they're still relevant today. And so I really do think that there's still a lot of unanswered questions about what we as professionals do in the field. And again, this notion of the practice of instructional design, what do change managers do, what are organizations doing? So I think this whole notion of, and I'm going to talk about performance improvement in that large sense of the word. I really believe that our field is more than just instructional interventions. And so I would push for performance improvement. Now, something you said a moment ago, Curt, I'm always talking to my students about feasibility. What is the feasibility of you doing that study? And I think it's becoming harder and harder to do experimentation because, you're going to go into a high school classroom and you're going to experiment. And now we've got COVID on top of it and everything else. So I think feasibility is a big issue. Now, if you think about trends, from the old Bob Reeser, what are the trends and the issues in the field? And those are constantly evolving and changing. Right now, I think learning analytics and performance analytics is a big area. I think, of course, the use of social media tools continues to be important questions that we're asking. So again, I just listed off sort of performance improvement, the tools that we use to help performance. I listed off social media. I listed off learning analytics. And I think, again, we know that gaming continues to be a hot topic. And I think those are other areas. However, those are all going to go away. When you said 89, 88, I came out of school. I came out of school with Simon Hooper, Mabel Kinsey, you, all those people. We were doing research on learner control of computer-based instruction.
Sure.
Well, that went away. Why? Because we evolved our tools and we evolved our questions. So learner control is no longer the question, but there's still questions related to how does one create a learning environment? Once again, whether we call it design-based research or Charlie Reguluth calls it formative research, Rita and I called it design and development research. I really think that we should be doing research on what are people actually doing in the field. Design-based research, creating interventions, doing several iterations of those interventions and trying those out. I think those are all appropriate topics. What I see going away, and when I say this, it's partly due to the change in how we collect data. But at one time, and Curt, I'm sure you the old aptitude treatment interaction stuff. So we give them a test of their psychological something or other, and we determine when I did this stuff, right? So in our collaborative learning studies, we measured their need for affiliation. Because one would assume people with higher affiliation needs would perform better collaborating, and people with low affiliation needs would perform better in individual learning. So we did an aptitude treatment interaction study. You don't see those much anymore. Those
Richard
are pretty
Snow.
dead. Snow, exactly.
I met the guy in Europe, Sweden, Gutenberg, Sweden, 1999. And he was in line with me. So I did get to have a chance to chat with him about that research, the line there. Learned a little bit from him, not much. It wasn't a long conversation, but at least here's the thing. You get to meet people. You never know where you're going to meet and how that's going to impact you. I met Jerome Bruner once, Bandura was on our board. So I've met him many times before they passed away, and I could go on and on about it, but, Jonathan, just getting the award. I knew him since my first month in graduate school, writing him a personal letter, and he writing me back in '86. So I recommend to any folks out there, when there are keynotes for a reason, go to all the keynotes and get your picture taken with them at the end, and then send them the picture that you took as a way to get to know the person. And they'll write you back thanking you for the picture. Oftentimes. But earlier you were talking about Dick's work, Dick and Carrie, Gagne, Marcy Driscoll, and I remember watching a video of you the other day where there's this wall of all these famous people on the wall that were from Florida State behind you. It's like a Hall of Fame wall. Was that all the psychology department at Florida State, or was that the whole university? I mean, was psychology and instructional design? Was it so many people you created a wall of fame?
Yeah, I'm not sure what wall you were looking at, but we had at one time, there were like 13 faculty in the instructional systems program here. We had Gagne, we had Briggs, we had Walt Dick, we had Roger Kaufman, Bob Morgan, right. Bob Branson. I mean, Marcy was the first female faculty member. Bob Reeser, Walt Wager, who's an Indiana graduate. And right. So we had a lot of these people here. And I know you're taping this, so I will tell you what I call the wall that's the old dead white guy wall plus Marcy. Because that's what they are, a bunch of old white guys, right? And that's the training they had. They was experimental psychology. They, just like you guys have Melinda and Schwen and the old white guys that started your program, right. Florida State had similar. And those would be those people. So we have a wall of honor. That's our emeriti faculty. And yeah, and it's very interesting too, because we had this one whole wall at one time of Gagne. The entire wall was Gagne, and people used to go, "Oh, the Gagne wall," right? But when particularly Asian graduates would come
Yes.
back, they'd stand in front of the wall and they would get their photograph taken in front of the Gagne wall, right? So yeah, we had a whole wall of Gagne at one time. We took the Gagne wall down because that's the past. Let's talk about it. We finally put up pictures of us too. We have our own wall with us on it, to the living faculty.
Well, I'm going to drive down and see it. I promise too, this coming, when I get a new car, I'll finally do that. There's often a joke in Korea that Hanyang University sends all their students to Florida State, and Ewha Women's University sends all theirs to Indiana because their advisors were trained at two different places. And so there's a pipeline from Korea in particular that goes each way. I'm sure Taiwan would be the same thing if we thought about it. So there's this lineage, right? And Indiana and Georgia to some degree, but Indiana and Florida State have been the leaders for a long, long time. University of Florida now is getting a lot of new tenure lines and whatnot, almost as prominent as the two of our institutions. It seems like they've been channeled money or earmarked money from the state to that's something new, isn't it? Have Florida that prominent within our field? So you got two institutions, just like Purdue and Indiana are pretty prominent in the field. Purdue because of engineering education, they have a lot of grants there. Now Florida and Florida State are, and Central Florida to some degree, but not as much.
Yeah, I think what's happening with Florida is they're throwing a lot of money at the notion of interactive technologies,
Right.
And these people that they're bringing in are expected to get a lot of grants. So the program that Albert is sort of running, the academic program, is separate from this new hiring. I mean, they're going to be teaching in something, but they're primarily research faculty. They're supposed, sort of like when Arizona State, after all that stuff happened at Arizona State and we all left, they brought Sasha in, right? I mean, they brought Sasha in and they started this new center. And so I think that's what Florida is doing.
My arch enemy, Sasha, this is being recorded, so I can't say too much, but there's, they are moving, and you're right, a lot of grants related to AI and maybe learning analytics there at Florida that are ongoing. But since you brought up next week, Albert's Ritzoff, I can't pronounce his last name properly, but we're going to read many articles from him on jobs within the field, competence and skills. And your article for this week, Getting Involved in Instructional Design and Technology, Recommendations for Professional Development, is on the week in career and professional development. You want to give, since this is Monday, most of my students haven't read your article yet. They have all week and probably have all next week too. You want to give them the Cliff Notes version of that, of what you remember. I mean, you've written dozens of articles, but give them the kind of the basis of why they should read that article, what you're pointing out in that article, why it was important, why did you write the article? Was it someone requested you to do it, which is often the case? It's a book chapter, people grab you and send you an email, please write this chapter, it's really needed. Or is it something that you saw was needed and you wrote it based on a perceived need that you saw in the field?
So another area that I've done some work in, and this is partly due to my work as I was on the International Board of Standards for Training, Performance, and Instruction, IPSTIPI, is so what are some of the professional issues that in the field? And so when we training instructional designers, and so I did some work. We did a dissertation study on somebody looked at job announcements. We looked at competencies in the field, and so we've done some work with that. So Bob Reeser asked me to write this chapter, and the original chapter was on what should people be reading in the field, and what conferences should they be going to.
Oh, that'd be interesting. I'd like to write that one.
Yeah, and so then what happened was the publisher, Reeser and Dempsey's publisher, said, we want to expand our our audience to more international audience. So we want you to bring in some international scholars to write some chapters. And so Bob sort of did a shotgun marriage, if you will, and said, Jim, work with Nick, and you guys come up with this chapter. So the first chapter I did on my own, and then he added Nick into this. And
Nick
so
is from the UK. So when you said international, they probably don't know who Nick Rushby is. But anyways, yeah.
Yeah, Nick was the many years, he was the editor of the British Journal of Educational Technology. Yeah. And so Nick and I worked together on iterations of that chapter. And so essentially what it is saying that as a graduate student, you should get involved now. Don't wait to get involved in professional associations because they're cheaper as a grad student. And so, it's this notion that, we have a number of people right now in the job market, right? And I'm just writing a letter of recommendation. And when somebody's looking for a job in the academic community, it's not just about your research, it's about your teaching and the service that you have been involved in. And so we're saying, get involved in these professional organizations and pick them based on, a variety. There's a variety, of them. There's, ISPI, there's ATD, there's, organizations in Australia and China and Korea and Turkey. And so we were really doing more of an inventory of those organizations. And then the journals, right? And so, we talk, not in this particular piece, but those of you that are interested in academic careers, what I tell my students is like, so what do you want to be known for, right? And, what's your focus area? What is it that you want people to say, oh, okay, that person could come in and do this kind of work, but also to be more broadly represented. Again, this one I'm just writing, this student is very, very into mobile performance support systems, which is great for research. On the other hand, you're not going to go in and teach a class on mobile performance support as the new person. So you better be ready to have those other skills that we expect people to have. So that's a little bit further afield than this article, but this chapter, again, was a request by the editors. Would you focus on this particular topic? And that's what we did. We looked at the field and what journals and conferences should you get involved in.
He did the same with me, asking me to do a primer on MOOCs. So
right.
Same kind of thing. And actually, Sunday we have my student just graduated recently. We studied Twitter job postings. So same with you studying the job postings in the field. Yeah, make sense of it. And the next one up is LinkedIn. And there are jobs. And I've been saying every week in here, there are jobs in this field. I mean, there's no lack of possibilities and opportunities for people who get a master's degree, they get a certificate even. They get an ED, PhD. There's no lack of opportunities out there compared to take a look back when we were in the late 80s and we were graduating from Florida State and then from Wisconsin. I went to Wisconsin. So, but I was in Ed Psych at Wisconsin. So it was a different kind of job search in effect at the time.
Do you work with Ann Devaney?
Sure. I had my first class was with her, a video production class with Ann. She's great. Yeah, she's wonderful. Yeah. Did you know her well, or?
I did. I met her through PIDT at the camping trip we used to take out there in Bloomington.
Oh, right. Is she still alive? Do you know?
I don't think she is. No.
Okay. So, do you happen to know Michael Streibel, who I had?
I do know Michael. Yeah, I know Michael. Yeah, I don't know. I don't. Yeah, he's very smart man. Yes.
When people were protesting on the Capitol, the former governor there, Michael Streibel is his name. Anyone can look him up. He decided to take. He was taking an administrative position, but he decided to take early retirement just to make sure he had his health care. They thought that the guy would take all benefits away from people. And he was trying to do that. He was running for, what was his name? He was running for president shortly after that. But you would know who that is. But and Wisconsin's been a weird state for the last 10 or 20 years with all the craziness happening there. But it was a good school. It was a different kind of graduate program. It was more of a neo-Marxist lenses that on everything. And so, yeah, it was really a social critical approach, except for Ann Devaney's course and maybe one others, which are more production. But it's much more in the theoretical, social critical analysis of technology and education. Yeah, and so and combining that with EdPsych, they're the two which provide more of the quantitative skill training and experimental design. You combine the two together, and probably is a nice marriage when you can do that. So I wanted to talk early on about what gets someone who's a major in elementary education and actually was a teacher in elementary education. What inspired you to enter this field? Was it somebody or someone or something that happened? What was the hook that brought you in?
Yeah, and this is going to show my naivete. So I was teaching elementary school in West Palm Beach, Florida, and my wife was working in a bank.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that everybody, as a teacher, everybody was telling me what to do, right? So, and to the point where not only did we have something called a unified curriculum, I remember getting demerits, if you will, because I didn't use the right color on my chart. We were supposed to use an orange that 9 weeks, and I was using a not orange, and I got part of my evaluation was you didn't use the right color on your chart. At the time, I had no clue that I was doing inactive learning a la Jerome Bruner, but I would take my kids out on the playground, and this would be during math. And I would actually have them do body movements to learn mathematics. And then I'd get called into the principal's office and I would be told, Mr. Klein, the other teachers are complaining because you're out on the playground doing mathematics. And I said, but we're doing mathematics. And it doesn't matter. The kids in the other classes are like, why is Mr. Klein's class outside during math? And so through that, I recognized that if I really wanted to have an impact, that what I wanted to do was teach teachers how to be better teachers. I had no clue that I also had to do research and publication. I had no clue that I had to be admitted to a graduate program to be able to do this. So my wife and I sold our home in West Palm Beach, Florida, and moved to Tallahassee. And in the summer of 1985, I set out to find a program that was going to help me teach teachers how to be better teachers. And I visited a variety of departments in the College of Education and in psychology. And I was an elementary school teacher, so I visited elementary school, the folks in curriculum instruction. And I visited the people in ed-min, and I visited the people in psychology, and I visited the people in social studies ed, because I thought I wanted to be a social studies teacher before I became an elementary school teacher. But there were no jobs in social studies at the time. And here it was, and I'm going to tell this story, Curt. Bob Reeser is retiring this month and next month. And so here it is. It's the middle of the summer, hot as hell in Tallahassee, humid, and I pop into the instructional systems program office, and there was one faculty member there, and that was Bob Reeser. And he was so enthusiastic about this field, and he explained to me that it is a merger of education, psychology, and communications. And I was in radio. I actually almost went into radio as a profession. And so psychology was something that was like very exciting to me, because education. Now, coming back to my naivete, no one is going to know this reference except maybe you, Curt. And I had this thing that I was going to be Mr. Chips. Now, Mr. Chips was this movie that was done in the 1940s where this was the beloved Mr. Chips, right? And Mr. Chips was getting ready to retire. And Mr. Chips worked at this like Ivy covered small college in New England, and everybody loved Mr. Chips. And that was my vision. I was going to be Mr. Chips. And so when I got to Florida State and realized that it was much more than teaching, that it was research and it was publication and it was service. And I was really good at this stuff, that it allowed me to expand my preconceived notions of what it meant to be a faculty member. And so then when I was applying for jobs, I applied for a lot of jobs, right? And I was offered a job at a place that did not have a doctoral program. In fact, I was offered a job at University of South Alabama. And at the same time, I was offered a job at Arizona State. And I decided that I wanted to go to an established doctoral program where I could keep learning from people who were well known in the field. Sullivan, Higgins, Colhavy, right? So they were all at Arizona State. And so I went from this, I thought I was going to be Mr. Chips at this small, like R3 school, to going to Arizona State University. And I said to my wife, and I said, oh, well, we could spend 3 to 5 years anywhere. 23 years later, man, right? We had raised our kids. We had owned several houses. Then what happened at Arizona State was, as I mentioned before, they closed the Graduate School of Education, told us, you'll have a job, but you need to find a department. And we ended up moving to Teachers College, and I immediately realized this was not a tenable situation. And so I started looking for a job. Marcy Driscoll invited me to come interview. And so, 10 years later, I'm here.
Well, Jim Middleton is my good buddy there.
I know Jim.
He helped me with my dissertation data, in fact, helped me analyze it. He's a close friend, and he got pushed to engineering department. For the audience here, and for those who are watching this tape recording later, Arizona State and the whole state of Arizona was caught in a quandary in that the government based the budget on the estimation of 100,000 new people moving to the state of Arizona every year, and the tax money that they bring in. During the Great Recession, that 100,000 people a year didn't happen. In fact, people were selling houses trying like crazy to get out of the state of Arizona. So there was a loss of the tax. I'm a former accountant. The loss of the tax revenue base there was tumultuous. I mean, it caused all sorts of harm to the people in higher education. You're furloughed, and many lost their jobs. I mean, we are all watching this happen. I remember Tom Brush going in his office once. We're all being furloughed this week and next week too, maybe the week after. Like, oh my God. So I want to comment on a couple of things. Kevin's got a question for you, but I want to make a couple more comments on in that in 1985, in the summer of 85, you were looking for a program and you found it, right? So in that summer of 85, I was applying to Wisconsin. I was taking correspondence courses to get the psychology credits that I needed to get into grad school, and the fall of 85 as well. In spring of 86, I quit my job. I gave notice on my birthday, December 16th, 1985. I gave 3 weeks. January 86, my last day, and then I went off to Wisconsin to grad school. Similar. So we're similar in our I was looking at Iowa, Washington. I thought University of Washington had great pictures of all the faculty huddled around the entryway to the campus. I thought it was pretty cool. But at that time, in-state tuition was really low. So I go to Wisconsin. I had no clue. You could get funding to go to grad school. I mean, I really didn't. I mean, no one ever told me. I just thought I had to save money and pick it up myself, And so the first semester I wanted all funding. And the next semester I didn't have funding. I had an hourly job. I was creating a telecourse called Teachers Tackle Thinking, Critical Thinking in the Classroom with Bob and Donna Ray Clausen. It wasn't until the third semester, actually, someone offered me funding to be the TA for a special ed class that had 200 students in it, 100 elementary majors, 100 secondary. And I was a former CPA. I don't know what the heck I was doing in that class, but it was a big learning experience for me. But I was looking at it, for me, as a former CPA and accountant, I was seeing the intersection of business, education, psychology, and technology those are the four for me that intersected. For you was communication added into the mix with psychology and education and technology. I'm sure you would admit technology too. So your fourth hub was communication. My fourth hub was business. And I probably think communication is the better fourth hub, or spoke. But the movies that come to mind before you said Mr. Chips was Dead Poet Society, having them outside, kicking a soccer ball, reciting poetry, or rowing a boat, reciting poetry, or walking in the courtyard. Or have you seen the movie Conrack? Do you know the movie
No,
Conrack?
I don't know that
Okay.
movie. No.
What's Angelina Jolie's father's, or what's Angelina Jolie's father's name? Does anyone know who Angelina Jolie is? I'm sure you all do. Now, do you know what her father's name is? He was in the movie as a teacher. A highly recognized, a low budget movie on the islands of the Carolinas. He's teaching, he's having kids go up and down the beach reciting maths, just like you were having kids outside doing their math. He was playing media in the classroom, records and other kinds of things to have kids learn mathematics. And it's a fascinating movie. Just like in Dead Poets, almost parallel to Dead Poet Society, where he lost his job for teaching innovatively, just like you were called under the carpet. So I thought when you told the story first, you're going to say, you know what? And I was going to say, you're a nonconformist. That's what I thought. That's what I thought you were going to say. Why you moved from an elementary setting to higher ed, where you could be a nonconformist and kind of, many of us are nonconformists.
I mean, I think the other thing about higher ed that a lot of us get into this because we don't want to be told what to do. Oh yeah, right. We want to be left alone, right? We just let me do my job. I got my students, I've got my research, I've got my thing, just leave me alone. I mean, I think that's a lot of what higher education's about. Well, we can't do that, obviously. You can't be left alone in higher ed. But I think a lot of us gravitate towards it because we think, I am a rock, I am an island.
Yeah. So Renee is my TA. Renee, look up Angelina Jolie's father, and we're have Kevin's going to ask you a question now. Kevin, come on in and ask him a question.
There. Hi, Dr. Klein.
Hey, Kevin.
Thanks for joining us tonight. It's been fascinating so far. I work for a dental research journal, and so I deal a lot with IRBs and making sure that the human-derived data that we get has all been logged in correctly, et cetera. And so your statement on the feasibility of studies is really interesting to me. So I was wondering, excuse me, I recognize that it's getting harder and harder to get IRB approval for studies. They just get more and more demanding, more and more restrictions. And obviously that makes it harder and harder to get any good data. So what do you see happening as far as IRBs go? Do you think it's just going to keep getting worse and worse? Or do you foresee at some point in time that there's a tipping point where we realize that we need this data if we're ever going to improve?
So I'll answer your question about IRB in just a moment. I think that we're going to see more and more compliance issues and data collection issues, period, whether it's research or not. So you're probably, if you pay much attention to current events, you probably saw that the University of Florida denied 3 faculty members the opportunity to be a witness in a trial about voter suppression in the state of Florida. At the same time, I was in, just this last week, I was in a meeting as a department chair. I'm a department chair now, and they were talking about conflict of interest and how everybody in the university now is going to have to complete additional online. They're going to collect a lot more data about our activities and whether or not those activities are a conflict of interest. And we're talking about activities that, I mean, used to be like, so did you have outside employment? Yes. And how does this get, what is your outside employment? Does it get in your way of your day job? No. And bang, you would be approved. Now we're talking about a lot more information. So IRB specifically, I think you're going to continue to see, like we've just implemented, one part of IRB is conflict of interest. And that now we've got a lot more work to do. Everybody's got to do for that. I'm told that one of the reasons that they implemented that is because they're concerned about funding from foreign governments.
Mm.
And so this is why they're collecting this information. Now, the IRB itself, and I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about this, but take a look at the Havasupai Indian Tribes lawsuit at Arizona State University. So I was on the IRB when the Havasupai tribe sued the state of Florida, excuse me, the state of Arizona, the state of California, the Arizona State University, University of Arizona, I think it was UCLA or Stanford, or we all got sued. And essentially what happened was, way back before I even was a graduate student, the Havasupai Indians signed an agreement that their blood could be collected to study diabetes research. What happened was the blood was not, the samples were not destroyed, and researchers who didn't have approval used it for schizophrenia research within the tribe and migration pattern research, showing that the Havasupai Indians came across the land bridge and was related genetically to the Asians who came across way back when. Well, the Havasupais have a creation fable, which basically Mother Earth opened up herself, and the Havasupai tribe was birthed from the Grand Canyons. The Havasupais live at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. This would be like telling a Christian that Jesus doesn't live. So this research was done without the permission of the tribe. And so they sued for $50 million. And then there was another group of Havasupais that sued separately for another $40 million. I was named as a defendant in that lawsuit. Wow. Because I was a member of the IRB. Even though we didn't approve this study, it was approved years and years ago, they said that we were not doing our due diligence to ensure that the protections occurred after the fact. Now, Kevin, this doesn't really get at your question, but based on that, in the state of Arizona, if you want to do any research with Native American populations, you got to jump through a lot more hoops now. So, basically protected classes, prisoners, pregnant women, and children. And in Arizona, and by the way, you ain't doing anything with Native Americans unless you get this special permission. So I think through, and by the way, the Havasupais had every right to sue. I mean, they did not agree for their blood samples to be used for schizophrenia research and for migration pattern research. And so I think what we see, I mean, I know I don't want to get into too much politics with you right now. A lot of, I've been told, I don't know if the data is out there, and I've been told by people specifically that as an African-American male, I am not going to get the COVID vaccine because of what happened with this Tuskegee Airmen. I've heard this from one of my own students, okay? So I think what happens is that the more we know that people are being harmed by research, the more people in certain classes, again, African-American males and vaccinations, as well as Havasupai, I think you'll see more and more compliance because of those issues, Kevin. So I don't think it's either going to get any better. It's going to continue to be harder and harder.
I agree with you. And I took a year to get one study approved, over a year, that had K-12, and I have not had any K-12 in it in the end. I wasted a year of my is an informal learning research study. And recently we're studying Nepal, students, teenagers who are learning from MOOCs during the pandemic, taking dozens, just fascinating. They're first learning English MOOCs to get ready for college. Their high school English teachers are getting excited. It became very community-based. These kids' definitions of self-directed learning is better than most of my graduate students. I mean, these are 13, 14, 15-year-olds, just so mature, so energized. There's hope for the world and just in talking to them. But because it involves K-12, it took us 6 months to get the human subjects approval. We got approved the week before AECT, and it's a study we had to present at AECT. So we were collecting data last week during the conference, getting up at 7 in the morning to interview the teachers and the students and try to summarize as much data as we possibly could. So it's really causing havoc with researchers trying to plan out their studies. And it's causing many people to decide we're not going to do K-12 research. I know this is my first K-12
that's what's
research.
happening. Yes.
Yeah. In decades. This is my first K-12 research in decades, literally, because it takes so darn long.
Well, and I think that is what my concern is. I foresee it getting harder and harder as well. And it just leads me to believe in many ways, we're shooting ourselves in the foot because we're going to stop having access to data to learn from. And they get more and more technical, even outside observation, starts getting quashed that hasn't ever really been considered before. So I think the whole situation is both fascinating and frustrating. So that's why it piqued my interest as you're dealing with it a lot yourself. Thank you.
Well, last week I got
training.
Yeah.
I was going to say the training itself is onerous. You got to go through how many hours of training now to get approved to do research in human subjects.
Yeah.
And I mean, don't get me wrong. I think that we should be protecting human subjects, but I think a lot of stuff we're doing is, stuff that goes on in classroom all the time. We're just collecting data on that. That's very different than medical research. But IRB's IRB. It doesn't matter if it's medical or social science. You still have got to have informed consent and all those things.
I got an email saying background checks. They want to do background checks. I'm like, what the heck is it? Well, I didn't get an explanation, but I think they've selected randomly so many studies to do some kind of background check on the study itself, just as to show due diligence on the part of our, human subjects folks. When I read, I thought someone's going to be an FBI agent coming to the house tomorrow and all this. So I don't think that's going to happen on this particular case, but it gets especially when you're a faculty member, at least here, you have to, if your doctoral student's doing the study, the faculty member is the first one named. So we are the primary person on each of those studies. And when you have an EDD and a PhD program, that means you might be on a dozen studies or 2 dozen, and yet actually only 1 or 2 are your actual researches. Your students are running these other projects, but you've got a risk in each one of these because you're the one approving it as the PI, quote unquote PI, because the students can't be the PI. Is it the same at Florida State?
No, they can be the PI. I sign on as their advisor.
Okay, I like that better. Here you have to sign on as the PI. And so some of the states I don't really understand them. I try the best I can, and or at least maybe not. I understand the premise of the study, but maybe not every research question or every analysis that they're doing. You can't understand every single analysis of every single study that's been that's being conducted, or you're going to be an inquiry person in the inquiry or statistics department. Do we, because we've gone an hour already, or almost, not quite an hour, because we started a hair bit late. So Rebecca, who normally has a question, Paishen or Renee, would one of you like to jump in here?
I'll jump on, sure. Hi, Dr. Klein. I just want to say I really appreciated your background information, and I really related to it. I used to teach elementary education as well, and then I kind of felt similar to you, and so now I'm teaching literacy methods to pre-service teachers, so kind of and I was wondering, I have maybe 2 questions for you. One's really quick, but when you made your switch to go back to school, and you said you talked with Bob Reiser, do you consider this field still kind of that same three components that he described, the education, psychology, and communications. Do you think that there's a fourth in there? Do you think one's less so now?
So I think the answer to that question is I don't see it the same way, because there's a couple of reasons for that. One is in the book that I co-authored with Rita Ritchie and Monica Tracy, and we look at like what are the theoretical, empirical, and practical foundations of the field of instructional design. Okay, and we sort of look at like there's three areas that really come from other fields, and there's four areas that come from other fields that impact us, and then there's four areas that our field has really had a hand in creating. And so the four areas that have impacted our field: systems theory, communication theory, learning theory, and what I'm going to call curriculum and instruction theory. And what I mean by that is, we think that in the 1970s this field appeared, and so the people like we talked about before, the big names in the field sort of started in the 1970s. But you go all the way back to Ralph Tyler in the 1940s, and they were talking about objectives, and Benjamin Bloom, not Bloom's taxonomy, but Benjamin Bloom and J.B. Carroll and all those people talking about how to design an instructional setting. And we had prerequisite and Jerome Bruner and all those people. So they kind of all came before our field. So again, we have systems theory, we have learning theory, we have communication theory, and we have sort of curriculum instruction theories and models. Okay, and by the way, it's interesting, and this is a quick aside, Rebecca, is when you look at the evolution of communications theories, very much like the learning theories. The earlier communications theory were very behaviorist in nature. It was what was going on in the environment. We didn't worry about what was going on inside the communicators. We moved from a very behaviorist theory of communication to more a cognitive, interactive theory of communication, and where we have encoding and we decode messages. And now we're in transactional communication theory, which is very constructivist in nature. And the meaning and the things behind it and the cultural influences of communication. And so we've got communication as a foundation. If we think about what our field has contributed, it's media design. How do we, again, communications helps us know how to design media. So we got media design. We've got performance improvement theories, but then we talked about two types of instructional theories. One we call conditions-based theory. And again, Keller's a good example of this. Gagne's a good example of this. And somewhat Jonathan is too. When you look at his problem-based learning, there's a set of conditions, and those conditions impact whether people learn ill-structured problems or whatever. But then there's this other thing that's emerged, and what we call constructivist-based theory. So how do you design? So we're not calling constructivism a learning theory. We're calling constructivism a philosophy that we apply when we design. So once again, I no longer see it as communications, education, and what was the other one?
Psychology.
Psychology. I sort of see it more broadly and bigger picture. Okay. So that's how, and that's just again through my learning and other people influencing
So Jim,
me.
that was her easy question. Go ahead with the hard one.
Yeah. What's your hard question?
I was just wondering, so what would you say is an unexpected role or position stemming kind of from this programmer field? So something that the average student wouldn't expect to maybe find themselves working in later on.
Let me clarify the question, Rebecca. Do you mean that people who go into the academy or people in the field who might work in other settings like business and industry, the military, and healthcare? So I'm not sure. I want to clarify your question.
I don't know. What do you think, Dr. Bonk? How should this
Your
is my
question.
first course in IST, so I'm still trying to navigate everything. Maybe because we actually spoke with someone who was in the health kind of field. She does like instructional design, but for the
For Baylor
doctors.
Medical.
Yeah. So I'd say just in this field. So if a student going through maybe this program at IU or Florida State, what is a very unexpected position that they could end up with that they wouldn't think that they could?
So in thinking about what's some of the more recent topics that people have been interested in, right? And this is sort of related back to that question as well. So I have an EDD student who she got her master's degree here, left before I ever arrived as a faculty member, and then started her own consulting firm. And in this, she has been doing a lot of work in helping people in both the STEM fields and in healthcare, but specifically related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So she got this project like with these engineers, and it had to do is how does the organization not just have the value of DEI, but what are they doing within the organization in terms of real world strategies to get DEI as part of their mission, vision, values, and objectives, right? And so I would have never thought about that, right? But this is the work she's doing, right?
And she's a consultant, you said?
She owns her own company.
Okay.
And she's a consultant who does DEI work. She did work, she was talking about, she did work for the city of New York. And one of the things that city of New York's with the area of DEI was they were doing healthcare. And she said that one of the requirements was that they wanted to ensure that they had people with not just LGBTQ, Black, brown, white. They wanted people with tats. They wanted people with piercings. And the reason that was because these were people in the healthcare field who were going to go out and deal with people who had tats and piercings, and they may be LGBTQ plus, they may be Black and brown. And again, it's interesting because, at least I hope, as a progressive politically, it's more than just, well, you know, we marched last summer and so everybody feels good, Black Lives Matter, right? No, it's more than that. It's people in our field applying their knowledge of DEI in healthcare to produce diverse and inclusive instruction. 2 years ago, nobody would have been talking about that, Rebecca. So I think, to answer your question more generally, if we look at our field, if we, you know, and we look at the history of our field, and you know, Bob Research does a good job, if you haven't read that chapter, it's like, so when crisis occurs, World War II, Sputnik, when crisis occurs, our field is right there. We're in the middle of a major cultural, political upheaval with people working at home, with DEI. And so I think our field is really poised to have the conversation about how can we be a part of these cultural, political, and social issues. I would have never thought about that when I was a grad student.
Well, that was the last thing said at ACT conference. The fact that we need to take more of a role, and time is now. We need to take more active in DEI and in the pandemic, in all these cultural shifts to remote learning and whatnot, that our presence should be felt more than it has been. People shouldn't just be talking about emergency remote teaching. If our field is representative of emergency remote teaching, we have not done our part adequately to inform and instruct and to teach people about teaching and learning in online environments effectively. So, we're running out of time, but I want to make sure that that Renee doesn't want to jump in with at least a comment, or Paishan want to just say at least a comment for Jim. Renee, go ahead. You mentioned you have bad internet today, right, Renee? I can't hear you. No.
There is a note in the chat from Renee,
Okay.
just to let you know.
Okay, she says a thank you there for you, Jim.
Yep, I just read it, and it says, "Can you hear me?" And so, no, we're not able to hear you, but thank you very much for your comment in the chat.
And so she did look up Angelina Jolie's father is John Voight, a very famous actor in Anaconda, the movie, if you've seen that. Very scary movie, and many other movies in the past, some Westerns and some other. But I want to say I never introduced you, Jim, but I did send everyone your bio. And I think maybe earlier I sent the CV. And if you look at pages 2 and 3 of Jim's CV, you'll see so many awards that he has gotten. Teaching awards from Florida State, Provost Teaching Award, in fact, nomination. Yeah. He also has Best Paper, Research Paper, Outstanding Book Awards, Reviewer Award, Service Award, alumnus. So he's working there. He gets a, what's it like? You got a degree, you're teaching there, and you get an award at the same place. You don't have to travel to go get your award. Just.
I got the alumnus award before they hired me, Curt. Now that they know me, I don't know if they would have given it to me.
You got faculty
no, but something that I will mention, because you said it earlier. I think that the thing that gives me the most intrinsic motivation, and the thing that I really hope that I am known for, is my mentorship of students. I mean, that is clearly the most important thing I think we do. It's like I said, the most intrinsically rewarding part of my job.
So we could start and end with that, because exactly, you pulled the words out of my mouth. I was going to say Outstanding Mentor Award, 1993 from Arizona State. And so there's other ones on here as well. But as I flip the page of his CV to go to the next page, I have to at least ask for a 30-second soundbite on this question. Read journal articles, of which you have dozens. The 2018 piece that's at the top is Competencies for Instructional Designer, a View from Employers in Performance Improvement Quarterly. That is the topic during the last weeks of this class. And so if we've already talked about it, but is there anything specific you'd like to say or talk about the competencies of instructional designers and other people within our field? We don't just create or train instructional designers. We train many people who run teaching and learning centers, and who might be program officers, or might work in government. Would you like to talk about the competencies that you found to be important?
Sure. My thinking in that area is very much impacted by the STIPI competencies, and the notion that there's a set of competencies that each job function in our field has. And so, for an example, I was the first author on the book, working with Mike Spector, Barbara Grabowski, and Ileana de la Teja, looking at also what are the competencies of instructors in face-to-face and online environments. And then I was part of the group, but I wasn't an author, on what are the competencies for instructional designers. And so I really do believe that we have to start. And it's funny, we've been having this conversation recently, and with today we had a faculty meeting, right? And we're talking about continual improvement of our PhD program. And we've brought some new people on board, and some people are retiring. And so, the question is, what is our PhD program going to look like next year and a year after and a year after? And I always begin with, what are the competencies? What are the skills, knowledges, and attitudes we want to ensure that our graduates have upon completion of the program? But in the STIPI model, we not only look at what do we have today, we also want to look at what's the future going to bring. And so if you're looking at competencies, you look at the literature, because the literature helps you, but you also have to talk to the people who actually do the job currently. And then you have to think about what the future is going to bring. And so when we start to think about what are the competencies for a particular job function, whether that's a trainer, a designer, an evaluator, or whatever, we have to not just think about what is the current skills. It's what are the current and the future skills. And I think that's an important thing when we design for competency. Of course, the other part of designing for competency is that, and I've already told you my bias, is that these things should be clearly observable. I'm not saying that learning has to be observable to be learning. What I'm saying is, in order for us to know that someone's learned something, how do I know that you are competent as an instructional designer? There's artifacts that you produce to show your competence. And so that's the other part of competency. I really do believe that these things must be, when we say things like soft skills, well, what does that mean? Well, we want people the ability to communicate. Well, what does that mean? And so you have to bring it down to that observable competency.
I highly recommend any of Jim's articles, any of his book chapters. I highly recommend anything that Jim's done, because he knows this field inside and out.
Thank you, Curt. Thank you.
And I really appreciate you coming in here today. I think you've inspired us to look further into this field and to explore what other units, what other universities are doing that maybe we're not doing in Indiana, and compare, because no one place has all the truth. And no one person has all the truth. Why I'm bringing different people in every week is we're hearing from different perspectives. But I think Brent Wilson, I think Tim Newby, I think Kyle Peck, I think Scott Gravinger, and now hearing from Jim Klein, we can start making sense of this field. And we had Allison Rosett last week, and we've had other people who are Terry Anderson from of Inquiry Model the first week, and here Lin from University of North Texas, with you and Joanne, who's now department chair at North. So we've had North Texas people, we've had Florida State people, we've had Purdue people. We've surveyed Penn State. We've surveyed some of the field here. Notice we had no one from Wisconsin. There is no program left, I think, at Wisconsin anymore, but there should be. And I think if to be honest, and don't tell anyone this, if Wisconsin came calling, I'd have to listen myself and trying to help the state, just like you, going back to the state where you were at, to try and to improve and to do all you can for where you were raised and so forth. I'd feel the same way. So I want to thank Jim, and I want to give him a round of applause. We'll put 3 words in the chat window, and the people watching remotely, Jim, can you say your email address in case they want to send you a note? Could you
sure,
state it? I don't think the chat shows up.
You want me to write it in the chat? Would it be?
I don't think
better?
the chat will show up in the replay. So why don't you go ahead and say it, what it is?
It's J Klein. So letter J, KLEIN at FSU.edu.
Did I hear you're an animal lover, Jim? Did I hear that?
Well, I have a big dog, so I don't
that's
know
what I heard. You have a big dog, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So everyone, we're not going to take a break tonight. We're going to say goodbye to Jim, and I'm just going to stay. And you can ask me any question you want. It's going to be Ask Me Anything session. So again,
thanks for inviting me. I appreciate you all listening.
Thank you. So you guys can ask away anything you want to know, anything that I forgot to mention, any comments that you want to make on that session with Jim. He was I really liked his enthusiasm about the field and his the powerful way he used language to describe the field. I think it was different than any of the other people that we've brought in this semester. He had some real interesting perspectives. Let's put it that way. Rebecca, you want to comment?
Sure, I'll comment, and then I had a question for you as well.
Okay.
That's okay. Yes, I enjoyed listening to him speak. I really enjoyed his background, just because that's a similar background to where I'm coming from, and I know there's a few of us LCLE people in this course right now. But
that's right. You're not an IST major.
Correct, and so it's nice to just have a different connection with, see where people started and how they got here. And yeah, but I liked how he answered my questions as well. I thought that was and like you said, the language of it was clear and it made sense, especially since I feel like everything's kind of going over my head sometimes.
You see, the pathways are many. We have math ed, accounting in my case, psychology, English literature. I'm trying to think of some of the other people's radio and TV. We've had, quite a varied, quite a number of different varied experiences that led people on a path to this field. Special education. Yeah. So.
And I'm finding it interesting how this, I guess it's the field itself has. I mean, back in the 80s, like you said, you were at Wisconsin, but it was primarily the psychology, right?
Yeah.
Department?
I was in the psych, educational psych, and they had an ed tech program in the School of Education. So I minored in ed tech. I majored in ed psych.
Okay.
And the two.
But then at a different school, it's something, something else.
Yep.
And then it's just kind of evolving to this IS or ID, IST, but you said we're the last one who has IST, right? Indiana?
Yeah, pretty much. If you look at my list, there might be another that use it, but we're only one with the branded name IST. Most are moving to learning, design, and technology. Okay. And I think Florida State has a weird name too, kind of like psychological science and learning systems or something like that. They combine their psychology. So at Wisconsin, the psychology or ed psych people didn't talk to the ed tech people. And some places they call it instructional design or instructional psychology or instructional psychology and design. So you see, or some call it media studies or media studies and technology. I mean, you see umpty nine different names out there. Maybe I can put the list up here. I'll give you the link to the list of names.
Oh, sure. Do you think that learning, you said what they're going towards, like learning design, do you think that's a more appropriate title?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. Here's a listing. I'll give you the link here if I can get back to a page. So if you click on that link, you'll see.
Oh, okay.
Instructional science and technology at Cal State Monterey Bay, where two of former IST students are there. One's running the program. See, East Carolina, where many IST people are, it's education and instructional technology. Emporia State in Kansas, we just had two people. They both left there, instructional design and technology. Some are in leadership programs. See, San Diego State, where Allison Rosett is at. It's in the ed leadership program, lo and behold. Now, this is just prominent management firm. I think San Diego State now has, see, the state school systems at the higher ed level can't offer a PhD. That has to be University of California, like Riverside or Irvine or UCLA.
Okay.
The state can't, but they kind of got a way around it by partnering. But those first 20 are math.
Oh, I'm not hearing you. I don't know if that's just me.
Oh,
Oh,
sometimes.
there. Now I hear
Okay.
you.
I think I had my finger in front of the sound, maybe.
Okay.
You see the prominent online programs and then residential doctoral programs. You see 60 of them. And there might be more that this is my list. I keep adding to it.
Okay.
So, you would think Harvard would have, prominent from technology, innovation, and education. Iowa State, instructional tech. Johns Hopkins doesn't say the program name. It's all online. But look at Penn State, learning, design, and technology. Purdue, learning, design, and technology. What's different is commas. Learning, comma, design, comma. Some go learning, comma, design, no comma. So Hawaii, I think, is the same. University of Houston, actually, it says with an emphasis in learning, design, and technology. See? But many are still coming in on Thursday. Amy Bradford. It's instructional design, technology, or instructional psych and technology. Some are curriculum and instruction, as Wisconsin, where I went. So Vanderbilt, learning science.
Oh, I think I lost you. Oh, there you are. Okay. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
Oh, there
But
you
you
are.
can see the wide gamut.
Yes. This is a cool list. I never saw this before.
Yeah, I designed that one. I have two other lists, one on where to publish and one on where to go to school, well, one on where to get how to get jobs. Let me put the main link in there. It has all three lists. It's a list because I get the same question all the time. Where should I go to school? Where should I publish? And where can I get a job? And so I created these three big lists, so I don't have to answer the question anymore.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
Yeah.
I'm opening them all.
Yeah.
I'll bookmark them. I do have a question on this week's blogging.
Yep.
Because we have a 12A and 12B. Since he came first, is it okay if we swap and do that? Okay.
Yeah.
Just make sure
that's to be expected to do.
Okay.
Yeah, because they came first. It's just the way working the schedule out,
Yeah.
When I booked one, I didn't want to change them.
Yes.
So,
no, that makes sense.
Sometimes you just hope you can get them, I mean, I was just like, he's never been a guest in my class. So
I liked him. He was very relatable.
Yeah, he's one I have to bring back sometime. Maybe not right away, but I do want to bring him back.
So I found that he and Meyer were very similar that way, as far as being relatable and being a little more down to earth in the way that they described how they viewed everything. So I appreciated that.
Meyer, did I bring a Meyer in?
Yes, I'm trying to remember what his first name was.
Yes.
Was it? It wasn't Rich, was it?
Mayor. Rich Mayer. Okay. I see. That's easily confusable. Yeah. Rich he was similar to Rich. You're right. In some of the, real kind of engaging speaker,
Yeah.
So you have any more questions, Rebecca, before we go to Kevin's questions?
Nope, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. How's the blogging going, Rebecca?
Oh, how's the blogging going? Good. I'm liking it. And I like the flexibility that we write to one another. And it's funny because I'll lose track because everyone's on a different timeline. So then I'm like, oh, wait, I didn't comment on their 8th week, but I did on their 7th. So then I go back and then I figured you probably didn't care as long as we were commenting on everybody's every week. I just didn't know. So, but I like the interaction with that. And so I think that's fun. I'm trying to think because I think it's Renee. She's been commenting on someone's in my group more so, and I wanted to just see if I'm doing okay. So I wanted to comment on mine just to make sure I'm okay. So maybe you could pass that along to her.
I will. Kevin.
She commented on my first one, and that was the last I saw her. So you're probably fine.
Okay.
I don't know that I have many questions. I actually during this lecture submitted my task 6. And I'm working on 5, which I've decided to do the definitions, which, some minutes go better than other minutes or hours or days. So that just depends a little bit on what else is going on. But I too have been enjoying the blogging. I've got 3 classes this semester, and this one and another one are very, well, this one's not as interactive as the other one is, but we're using all Canvas on the other one. So it's all the inline discussion in the other, and they're 2 very, very different methods of communicating, and it's a little hard sometimes jumping back and forth between the 2 to try to get my mind wrapped around where I'm at on this one and where I'm at on the other one. But frankly, that's educational in and of itself. So I don't know that I mind spending that.
Yeah, I've got a book in 1998 on these systems and so forth, and I've studied and I published many articles on async and sync, and just maybe during the last few years, as we've moved to the Canvas system and others, I've gotten a little disappointed with the tools like Canvas for a class of 22 students like ours, in that the conversations become a little unwieldy. They're more interactive, and they're more spontaneous, can be more spontaneous, and can be kind of exciting during that week, much more so during the week in question, during the day in question when people are in it. However, 15 weeks later, the blogs add more value.
Yeah.
Because there's something that you can go back to even 10 years later. Whereas the discussion forums in Canvas, you'll probably never be able to go back to them unless you copied and pasted them in purposely. So that's one aspect of it. And as an instructor, to try and monitor each of the postings and conversations becomes a kind of almost a nightmare sucking you into it all. And it almost becomes a class within of itself. And like a separate class, like you're teaching 2 classes, one's the discussion forum and one's, lecturing on it. So, the sun never sets in the online class is all what I say. And I think with blogging, you have a chance to, come in time. I haven't come in, admittedly, this semester in much of anyone's, but the opportunity is there to come in when you want and to exit when you want and to do, and so forth. And I'll be commenting on your super summaries and what you've learned from it. And I'll be reading through all your blogs during that final week in here and taking a look at what you accomplished. And I have been looking at them. I'm very impressed by them. So I think the professionalization and the long-term nature of blogging and the meta reflection that the blogging allows. Now, I did a study in 93 or 94 comparing synchronous to asynchronous. And there's in a synchronous posting, kind of the tool, like a chat tool, sort of from Norton Utilities or Norton Connect. There's a lot more postings, but very short ones. And people weren't reading each other's posts, weren't really meta reflecting at all. Whereas the asynchronous allowed more grandiose macro statements and more critical thinking was taking place within them. Now, within Canvas, you're doing asynchronous typically. There is an opportunity to do synchronous in Canvas. They have a chat window and other kinds of things like we have here. And the same within our blogging. It's mostly asynchronous based. The only synchronous is here in the chat window. If people come in these Zoom sessions, they could chat with one another using the synchronous tools, or we could have breakout groups if enough people came. But we really don't have a large contingent of this class showing up every week. We have 6 or 7, sometimes we have a dozen of the 22 students coming in here. We almost need that dozen or at least 10 to have a decent breakout groups, which I wanted to try more of this semester. I haven't done so because I was lecturing early on, and now I want to have the, chance for breakouts. People aren't coming in here, unfortunately, to do that. But overall, I'd say I'll stick with the blogging, although I went with debating years ago, debating students of another university using a tool called Nuclino, which is a free tool, a wiki-like tool, which, like a wiki tool, if you erase things by mistake, they are erased permanently. So you have to be very careful with that tool. So we did, Wayne State students debated the students in my class, and I like that approach too. And so I've tried the Canvas discussions, I've tried the debate, I've tried the blogging, and I might write a paper comparing the three and the pros and cons of each approach. And so you'll be getting the course evaluations. If you have any advice to pros and cons, you can put that in there. There might be a question related to this in there.
I like the freedom of the blog. I like the freedom of the blog, though it's much messier.
Yeah.
But I do enjoy the freedom. And in the other class, I like the fact that it's a class of 20, and the professor has broken us into 2 groups of 10 for our Canvas discussions, which makes it much, much nicer. So last semester, I had one where all of us were in the same Canvas, and you get that one person who is a professional student and just chats and chats and chats and chats, and you're supposed to keep up with this stuff, and you go in one day and there's 20 posts, and the next day there's 100 posts, and you're like, I don't have time to read 100 posts.
Yeah.
And especially as none of it really related to anything that I had said or was reflecting on, it made it frustrating. But I like the blog aspect. Obviously, it has its cons, but it's been very enjoyable.
Yeah, I agree, and I'll end with that notion here. I'm going to post this. Stop the recording.